So moved.
Second. Moved by John, seconded by Jean. All in favor, raise your hand and say aye. Thank you. The agenda is adopted. We have one person giving public comment this morning, Laura Wakefield. I'm not going to read the whole script. Dr. Wakefield, I think you know it. Go ahead and come to the podium and we'll start your time when you start speaking.
I'm not sure they're working right now.
Okay. So I am here, Dr. Laura Wakefield, and I am a parent advocate, and I work with families in Columbia Public Schools who have children with disabilities. And I'm here to talk about the NOVO contract. And I did send an email, but I didn't know if any of you would have time to read that before today, so I just wanted to hit the highlights quickly. I'm still concerned about the contract. Item 7B, the no temporary hire. There's still a no compete clause there in favor of NOVO, and nothing is protecting NOVO from poaching CPS staff. Please, I urge you not to approve this contract until you address that. My SLP colleagues in other states have seen entire special education staff be hired by contract companies like this. Item 13C, governing law. It looks like they did change it to say that it will be in accordance with laws of Missouri instead of laws of Florida. However, they still say that any litigation that could occur would exclusively occur in Broward County, Florida. I am not sure how those courts would have jurisdiction over Missouri laws. And then also it says that CPS would have to waive its claim or defense for jurisdiction in that venue. And I'm not sure that CPS could do that, knowing that certain issues would have to be addressed in Missouri. Item 13H, the negotiated agreement, says that this agreement can't be more strictly construed against one party or the other. However, if you look at 7B and 13C, they are more strictly construed against CPS, and they're more beneficial for NOVO. Finally, the fee schedule is missing in this updated contract, and so I'm not sure how you as a board can vote today without that on there, because you'll be committing CPS to financially do something that you're not aware of specifics on. Other items, CPS will be responsible on 2B for doing all the background checks and certification transfers, upgrades, work history verifications. That's a lot of work. And considering how, it's already difficult for HR just to do their own CPS staff, and adding this to their plate, I think is unrealistic. And then 2C, it says that item 4, Roman numeral 4, if CPS signed this agreement containing this clause, it would be a false agreement, because you're saying that you don't have any staff with this specialized skill set, and you do. What you have is a shortage of those staff. It's not that you don't have them. So the only one on there might be registered behavior technicians. That would be the only one that you don't currently hire and have certified in that role. So I think that would be a serious concern. So I urge the board to remove this from the agenda, and or if you take a vote on it, vote no or abstain because you don't have enough information. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wakefield. All right, well, go ahead and turn the time over to Ms. MacArthur for our tax rate hearing.
Good morning. So we're here today to have our annual tax rate hearing. We are required by law to set our property tax rate prior to September 1st each year. So we're going to walk through the computation and the different assumptions that we are looking at today in order to set our tax rate. So first of all, when we set our tax rate, it is required to set that levy by fund. And so the state defines the 4 different funds. As we look at them, you say Fund 1 is our incidental or our operating fund. Fund 2 is our teacher's fund. And when we talk about and we present a lot of our operating funds internally, we look at our incidental, our Fund 1 and 2 combined together is what we consider our operating funds when CPS is presenting information on the budget and such. Then we have Fund 4, which is our capital projects, part of the levy does go into that fund. And for the property tax purposes, funds 1, 2, and 4 are considered operating funds. And then debt service has a separate calculation, and that is required by law, and to repay our general obligation bond debt, so the principal and interest payments on our debt. And that has to have a special calculation per the state auditor's office, and it has a separate bank account, and it's considered separately. So debt services and is our Fund 3, and we'll go to that calculation as well. So just a reminder of what the property tax and the impact that has on our budget. This is a graph showing the breakdown of our operating revenues for our 24-25 budget. You can see the large part of that pie graph there is our blue, which is our local revenue. And then pulled out to the right-hand side, we have the breakdown that over 50%, so 51% exact for this 24-25 is coming directly from property tax revenue into our operating funds. And then about 10% is from Prop C, which is our sales tax, which is also a consideration as we're going through this and setting our levy today. So that makes, you can see 63%, and so that's over about 61%. There's about 1% other, some investment earnings and some other taxes that are included in that. But the large majority of that local revenue is from our property tax and from our sales tax, those two areas. And then you can see the green, state usually runs right around 30%, and then federal and others 5% and less. We also have a board policy along with our state statute that governs the tax rate. So board policy DC-2 governs our tax rate hearing and review. Again, statute requires adoption of the final tax rate levies annually before September 1st each year. And the statute also requires us to have at least one public hearing to be held after the budget is adopted. Of course, our budget is adopted in June, and so that's why we're here today, to have the public hearing to be able to talk about our tax rate. And then the other thing that the statute says is that the tax rate shall be calculated to produce substantially the same revenue as budgeted for and as collected for the property tax that was on the tax rolls last year and the previous year. So that means absent of any new construction or new building, we want to have substantially the same revenue for all the housing and the properties and everything that was on the books last year that continues to be on the books for this year. And this is just more of a reminder as we're walking through this. A couple years ago, we did have this court case that came through that was Blankenship versus Franklin County decision that affected our tax rate. Again, I just like to continue to remember this so we have this in the forefront of our mind. This is something that once it happened, like it reduces our tax rate going forward, so indefinitely. So it's not something where like it was just a one-time thing and then it came back. So there was a court case between a taxpayer and a county collector, and it did end up where it ruled the Court of Appeals found in favor of this taxpayer, and it was ruled that was unconstitutional to extent it raises the tax rate above the voter approved rate. Again, nothing that we had done to calculate our tax rate prior to this in 2021 was illegal. It was exactly the way that it was approved through the calculations by the state auditor's office, but just the way that the court has ruled that now that we cannot go above that voter approved rate. And so again, this reduced our levy adjustment by about 33 cents in 2021. And so that is something that our tax rate then is reduced indefinitely. Without us being able to go back to the voters to get an additional levy, we cannot recoup that additional 32.84 cents for our levy. The revenues, and just a reminder, the last time we did go to our voters for a tax levy was in 2016, so that was quite a while ago now. And so when we were promoting that, and we went and had a lot of public forums and got public input for when we went to the voters for this tax levy, and the message that we heard at that time was that we want you to ask for everything that you need, and we don't want you to come back. So we don't want you to come back every other year to ask for an additional raise. We want you to ask for everything that you think that you might see for the foreseeable future, and then be able to incorporate that into what your budget going forward. And so it's late 2024 now, and so this has been 8 years now since our last tax levy was passed. So we have been able to operate within the revenues that they gave us, even with that reduction from Blankenship, the ruling from there. But just a reminder of when we went for that 65 cents that was authorized, like we had a breakdown of how we would use that money again, and we've just a reminder, we have continued to put money into recruiting and retaining highly qualified personnel. Again, that's mostly salaries and new positions, and you've seen as we go to the budget each year, large majority of all of our increases in our budget each year is for salaries and new positions. AEO, which is Achievement, Enrichment, and Opportunity, there was some additional for those opportunities that was allocated in that amount, and then continued operations was about half of that as well, and other increases. So the total additional revenues from that 65 cents in 2016 was about $16 million. And then, so basically half of that was reduced by Blankenship. And so we've been operating within that amount of, so about $8 million already reduced from that original amount that we asked for the voters, but we have still been able to operate within the amounts that we have available to us. So there's several assumptions and considerations necessary that we have to take into when we're computing the tax rate each year. So the first thing is our assessed valuation. So we do get those assessed valuation numbers from our preliminary numbers from our county at the end of July. And so that's the first piece of information that we wait for each year before we can start putting this together and computing what our tax rate might be. And we're looking at the tax rate, what the assessed valuation was last year compared to what the assessed valuation is this year. Whether it's a change, and so it's an increase or decrease has to be considered from the prior year. Prop C, again, Proposition C is our state sales tax, but we are one of the few counties in the state that still does not have a waiver of the Prop C rollback. So we have to use we do have to look at our Proposition C revenues and then roll back our property tax rate in accordance with that calculation. Again, debt service is calculated separately, so we look at that debt service, the allowable and the necessary levy to be able to cover our principal and interest payments on our bonds and our debt service fund. And then finally, we do have to take into consideration Hancock amendments each year. So first, we'll look at our debt service fund calculation. Since that one is separate, it's a little more straightforward. And so the state auditor's office sends us information, and we have to put in the information about what our general obligation, what our principal and interest payments are for the upcoming years, and what our fund balance is. And then once we enter in that information, then they come up with a calculation and said, this is what your allowable rate is per the state auditor's office. So 1.1160 is what the state auditor's office has said is our allowable. We can take up to that amount in our debt service fund. However, when we went to the voters, the last time we've had an increase in our debt service levy was in 2012. And so when we went to that, we said all of our long-range planning, all of our capital projects, all of the debt that we continue to take out, we will continue to operate that within the debt service levy of 0.9719. And so we have continued to keep that levy flat in our debt service fund as we have taken out additional debt, because we've been able to use the revenue generated by that levy amount to be able to continue to maintain a significant fund balance enough to be able to pay for future years on our principal and interest payments in that debt. So we do voluntarily roll back. Again, the auditor's office says we can take up to this amount, but we have voluntarily rolled back this year's 0.1441 to get back to that 0.9719 for our debt service levy. And so that's what we're recommending for the 24-25. Again, and just a reminder, I didn't say this before, but it's the calendar year property tax, as well, the tax rate is for calendar year 2024 that drives our revenues for the 24-25 budget. So as we switch over to our operating fund, again, Proposition C revenues, this is a statutory rollback. Again, this Proposition C is a state sales tax that's dedicated just to education that was approved by the voters back in 1982. And so the reason for the rollback originally, when it went into place, was that we want to encourage everyone to go out and spend money and buy things locally. And so that money from sales taxes, when you go out and buy stuff, funnels through the state and then back to us through a calculation. And so it's like, we want you to spend money. And so for voters, community, for you spending money on your sales taxes, we're gonna then reduce the property taxes by an amount equal to that, so that we are reducing our property taxes to encourage you to spend money on other stuff. Again, 95% of all the school districts in the state of Missouri have a full or partial waiver of the Prop C rollback requirement at this point. Columbia Public Schools does not. And so the calculation, there is a calculation we have to go through each year. Again, this is set by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, the State Auditor's Office, and this information has to be submitted to them. So we take our net Prop C revenue on our annual Secretary of the Board report. Again, CPS is an accrual-based district, which means that we record our revenues based on not when they're received, but based on when they are earned. And so CPS report, the receipts for sales taxes are basically, there's a 2-month lag. So sales taxes that were collected in June aren't turned over until August. So we have final numbers that were just received this week. And so that's why this information is always very timely, and we don't have a lot of lead time, but we do get our DESI payment from the state about the 20th of the month. So I had about 2 days, to be able to get that information and plug in those final numbers. So this is slightly different than what we saw at the Finance Committee last week. And that's because we do an estimate for the Finance Committee for that last month of Prop C. And this is our final numbers that we just received this week. So again, our Prop C revenue from the prior year, so this is for the fiscal year 2024, was almost $27.5 million. And you can see on this slide, I left the historical view, so you can see how Prop C also has been increasing over the last 4 years significantly. And we've talked about this. Sales taxes have remained strong coming out of the pandemic. The last couple of years, we've had additional supplemental distributions of sales tax revenue at the state level in the spring. And that's also one of the reasons why this changed, because we had a pretty hefty June payment because of that supplemental appropriation that was released in the late spring this year. So when we're doing the computation, we have to take them half of the Prop C revenue on the rollback. So you have half of that, and then you can back out a couple different things that you have some adjustments for. And so the adjusted Prop C revenue that we're going to reduce our property tax rate by is the $12,571,000. And then you have to take into your assessed valuation again at the time of the setting, which this is our preliminary. So all of those numbers, if you try to go back and compare them to what our final, they're not going to match. So we're always doing this calculation at the beginning of the year. So each one of those numbers on that assessed valuation line are the preliminary numbers for that year. So preliminary numbers because you can see, as we'll look at the next slide, it looks like between 23, 24, and 24, 25 that our assessed valuation is increasing. Well, that's from our preliminary numbers are increasing from last year's preliminary numbers, but it's actually going to be an overall decrease that you'll see going forward. Again, $3.19 billion is our assessed valuation. And so once you divide that out, the calculation, the rollback on the levy for Prop C is 0.3427. And so that's the amount of the tax levy to be able to get that $12 million number that we have to reduce the overall levy. And again, it's a very slight increase. You can see it's always in the 30-cent range over the last several years. It's only 0.0067 difference in our rollback between this year and last year. So then once we have our Prop C, then we look at our assessed valuation. Again, there's several components of our assessed valuation that we have to take into consideration when we're doing that calculation. The first amount is we talked about, we want to look at the property that was on the books last year compared to what's on the books this year. So that new construction amount, which is new construction improvement, by statute, all new tax revenue from construction improvements and personal property is collectible by the school district. So there's no limitation on any new items that were not on the books last year compared to this year. Then if there's a reassessment, typically that occurs every 2 years. 2024 was not a reassessment year. We saw a larger increase last year because it was a reassessment year, but that's not something that we're looking at for 2024. The tax increment financing, or what we refer to as our TIF properties, those amounts are not taxable, so we do reduce our overall assessed valuation by that amount each year, which is $3,447,795 for those 2 TIF properties. And then under the Hancock Amendment, again, we can only take the growth of the existing property, which is lesser of the actual increase in value, with the consumer price index, or that's an inflationary number. So this year it would be 3.4% is what they're giving us for CPI, or the statutory maximum of 5%. Again, what we're going to see on the next slide is the permitted growth on the property of the books is the higher of those 3 numbers or so. But actually, we have a decrease, so the Hancock Amendment doesn't have to be taken into consideration this year. Again, here is our assessed valuation summary. Our final 23 was $3,224,000,000 in assessed valuation, and our preliminary 2024 is the $3,194,000,000. And so you can see that is a decrease of about $30 million. And so that is about almost 1% decrease between last year and this year. And again, absent of that amount, remember that we saw about over $40 million of that was new construction. And so if we didn't have that additional $40 million, that it would have even been a larger decrease of about $70 million. And so again, that's important because we are still seeing growth between last year and this year in that new construction, because it would have been an even larger decrease, about over 2%, if we didn't have that additional number built in there for new construction. And so the next slide then shows our assessed valuation broke down by our different categories. So we do have our real estate and then our personal property tax that we do look at separately. So our real estate is then broken down into residential, agricultural, and commercial real estate to get our total real estate number. And you can see that's the top section there between the final last year and the preliminary. And we do have an increase in our real estate. Again, you can see it in the far right-hand column, the increase about $45 million, almost all due to that new construction number. Our new construction number over $40 million. So that's in our real estate. And so that's where we're seeing the increase of right under 2% for our increase in our real estate numbers between last year and this year. So again, the large driver of this decrease that we're seeing in our assessed valuation then is that personal property tax line. And we've talked a lot about this the last couple of years. 2 years ago, we had a large increase in our personal property, over 20%. And so we had that bubble. And so now I think we're seeing that come back down as the used car market and some of those different things that drive personal property numbers are coming back down. And so that decrease, about $75 million decrease in our personal property, equates to over 10% in that personal property tax line. And so that's driving the overall assessed valuation decrease. So increase in real estate, decrease in personal property, for a net total assessed valuation decrease of about $30 million. And so you can see last year, again, I left those numbers up there. We did have a pretty significant increase, over 6% increase in our overall assessed valuation from the prior year. And so I think as we get the ebb and flow, again, it was important that we don't spend everything in the first year. And so that's one reason why we have fund balance and we put those additional revenues, and we don't do it all in 1 year, but we were able to take some of that and incorporate it into some additional increases for future years. But again, because things are sometimes we come in over budget, sometimes we come in under budget. This is one of those years where we are under budget, but because we have fund balance, that we're not in an urgent situation where we have to make any kind of significant decisions today or tomorrow. We have a 5-year plan. All of this can be incorporated into that plan again, but we do see a decrease. And the other thing that we will look at, again, our final numbers don't come in until December. Typically, we do see a slight increase in personal numbers as those different things come into our county between July and December. And so I project that might go up slightly, but I still think we're going to be pretty flat in our overall assessed valuation between calendar year 2023 and calendar year 2024. So then once we have that assessed valuation, and we have our Prop C and all those different pieces we have put together, then we go into the actual calculation of our operating tax levy. And so they give you a ceiling number from the prior year. So we'll start out again with the 5.0367. That was a prior year ceiling. And then that max, as you go down, work down the screen, and we have our maximum operating levy. Again, we can't go above that amount, and that's 5.1437. But they also give you a current year tax rate ceiling of 5.0903. So that amount is less than the actual amount that was authorized. And so we start with the 5.0903. Then we back out that Prop C rollback amount that we talked about, 0.3427. And so when you subtract that 0.3427 from the 5.0903, we get our net recommended rate for our operating funds for 24-25, 4.7476. And so then that's our overall operating. And so then we have to break that down by fund. And so the next slide then shows how that is broken down by fund. We have our incidental fund, which we're going to keep flat at 1.4969. And we're going to put the additional increase into our teachers fund, largely because that's where the large part of our salary additions and different position increases went into the budget. So we want to make sure any of that revenue is going into the teachers fund. And so we're again the full amount of the increase between last year's levy and this year's levy, 0.0464, is going into the teachers fund. The capital projects fund we were keeping flat at 0.1. And then for our overall operating funds, 4.7476 with that full increase in our teachers fund. And then we add back in our debt service levy for our total levy of 5.7195. And then that's the amount that will turn into the county prior to September 1st to meet our statutory requirement. And then after we get the tax rate, what we all want to know is how does that incorporate into revenues into our operating in our debt service fund. And so this slide shows you what was our tax rate last year, what our budgeted tax rate was. Again, we didn't go to the voters, so we were not projecting an increase. There's a slight difference just with the Prop C rollback requirement and the changes in assessed evaluation. Again, the difference 0.0464 in our tax rate. You can see then our assessed valuation. Again, we are coming in under what we had budgeted for our assessed valuation increase. You can see that. The new construction right around what we suspected. We budgeted a new construction amount of $40 million. We're at $40,248,000 for this year. And so and then our collection percentage runs right around 95%. So the overall revenue that we're projected to increase or projected to receive from that tax levy of 5.7195 is about $173.5 million. And that's for all funds. Again, that is about a $5.5 million decrease from what we had originally budgeted. About $4 million of that is in our operating funds. The other $1 million or so is in our debt service and capital projects. And then finally, I always like to show the slide of how this impacts like the average taxpayer when they get their tax statement in the mail. So again, it's not a reassessment year, so we're projecting that the average home value is about the same as it was last year. And so we're just do we take that number? And you can do this with any number. So any person who, based on the value of your home, can do this calculation. The assessment level for residential property is 0.19. So you take the value of your home times 0.19 and you get an assessed valuation. And then you divide that out by 100 to get your value on what your property tax is calculated. So in this instance, it's $499. So you take that $499 times the tax rate, 5.7195 is what our tax rate is going to be for this current year to get an annual property tax And that amount should be similar to what you will see on your real estate taxes for the year. So again, this year is 2,853 in this calculation. Very small increase, about $20 from last year is basically what you're going to see a difference on that tax statement. And then the last slide just shows historically, again, just a reminder, we have not went to the voters since 2016-17. You can see there along the far right-hand column, we have slight increases each year, but the last large increase that we had was when we went to the voters for that tax levy in 2016. Again, we did roll back part of that levy in 2016. That's why it doesn't say 65 cents on that top line. It says 0.5774. So we rolled back part of that because we said, well, this is what we need, but we don't need it all right now. And so we'll voluntarily roll that back till future years. And so then in 18-19 is when we took that voluntary rollback and we increased it by about 9 cents there. And then there's some differences, but the large decrease then in 21-22 was due to Blankenship. And so then down the bottom line is just the last couple of years, just small increases and decrease based on our different, what we're bringing in for Prop C and different assessed valuation changes. But again, mostly materially the same as it was in prior years. So that is all I have for today. I'm willing to take any questions that you guys have for me.
Any questions? All right. Thank you, Ms. MacArthur. That was an excellent presentation. So is there a motion to approve the recommended tax rate of 5.7195?
So moved.
Second.
This will be a roll call vote, correct? Okay.
Okay. All right, Mr. Willoughby,
Yes.
Ms. Snodgrass,
Yes.
Ms. Farrell,
Yes.
Mr. Cobbins,
Yes.
Mr. Lyman,
Yes.
and Ms. Waters.
Yes. All right, we've approved the tax rate. The next part of our agenda is to hear about theme schools from Dr. Helen Porter.
As is read, he's
Yep.
not sure this is right. Can you try to talk it?
Test, test. Can I use my teacher voice?
Let's bring you in.
It's not plugged in.
Usually outside. It's not plugged in?
All that stuff.
Why is that not working then? No electric.
It's gonna come on over here, you get an opportunity.
So,
No, you were on.
I was on.
You're on.
I'm not.
She's on.
Good morning.
You are on.
Good morning. Good morning, I'm Helen Porter, Chief Schools Officer. I'm here to talk to you about theme schools this morning. Appreciate you and your attention. Dr. Wood brought us this book. It's called Right from the Start. I mentioned it before. It's a roadmap to make sure initiatives are successful. And so I will be referencing this throughout the year. But I just kind of wanted you to know the plan. It's based on this book. And there's a series of elements in this book that help school districts or organizations plan for initiatives and perhaps some change. So as you know, our theme this year is Stronger Connections and Greater Achievements. We celebrated that during Convocation, so we're excited to have that theme as our kind of roadmap as well for our year together. I also want to remind us about our CSIP goals. This is why we're concentrating on theme schools. Our attention to growth, getting scholars to school and improving attendance, innovation, keeping them in class, and achievement, catching them up and advancing them further. So as we look to increase attendance, increase academics, and decrease discipline, our CSIP goals are aligned with our theme schools in relation to scholars' growth. The book suggests that we start with the why, and we've heard a lot of that in organizations, and any organization you're a part of, you've probably heard that. So why? Why are we doing this? why are we focused on this? Well, we have a commitment to our mission, excellence and equity in our education for our scholars, and a focus on achievement, enrichment, and opportunity for all students. And so this guides everything we do in Columbia Public Schools. This is our why. So the role of theme schools, oh, sorry. Oh. I have, well, how do I get back? Where's my back button?
Is it not letting you go back?
What? There we go. All right. And full screen is?
It should be Control L.
Control L. Okay. There we go. Role of theme schools is to present specialized programs that cater to diverse interests and learning styles. We create pathways for academic growth. Okay. It shows correctly on my laptop, so. Oh, they're fixing it. They're fixing it. It creates pathways for academic growth and personal development for our scholars, and our focus areas are on STEM, STEAM, PBL, PBE, Fine Arts, IB, and AVID. So part of our why is this empowerment and exploration. We enrich the educational landscape for our scholars. We build tailored programs for individual interests and strengths, and we prepare students to become future leaders and innovators. I want you to think about when you were in school, why did you go to school? Why did you show up? For me, it was band. It was marching band, it was concert band, it was soccer, it was cross country, it was being in the musicals, not actually as a singer, but in the pit orchestra or in the tech crew. That was what brought me to school, and I did school because I wanted to, and I didn't want to get in trouble, but there needs to be something that our scholars can identify with and connect with at school. So I'm not going to ask you, but what was the thing, I just want you to think about what was the thing that brought you to school. Do you have it in your mind? John's smiling, it must be good. I'll ask you later. We want that enriching educational landscape that our scholars will want to come to school and stay in school for. You're a miracle worker. There you go. Do you all have it up on your computers? Okay. Is it all right if I continue? Okay. So our tradition of innovation, we embrace enriched learning experiences, we prepare students for a competitive global landscape, and we foster creativity, critical thinking, and collaboration. So we need to be doing a better job of telling our story. If you can see the slide, you can see that we already have schools that are themed. We have STEAM or STEM at Benton, Fine Arts at Locust currently. We are walking the journey with Derby to consider them as a fine arts school. We've already set up some things to enhance and enrich their fine arts climate. Place-based education, we have a focus on ag ed at Tumaw Prairie. Russell has been going through place-based education. They're on their second year as a Teton Science School. TSS comes in and does enrichment and innovative professional development with their faculty. Project-based learning, we have that at West Boulevard and Grant. And IB, which we will hear about in a minute, we are looking at Blue Ridge and our new Southwest Elementary. And then, of course, AVID. AVID is really strong in all of our middle schools. Lang Middle School has selected to enhance AVID even more. And then Alpha Hart Elementary. So as we are pausing for our technical assistance, I'd like to invite Virginia Tate. She is an assistant principal at Rockbridge High School, and she comes to us from a district that has a strong IB connection. So we've just asked her to come and just tell a little bit of a narrative about how IB has helped scholars in her educational career. Thank you, Virginia.
Hi, I'm Virginia Tate. I am a newly minted CPS employee. So I came from Columbia, South Carolina, finished my work there at the end of June and started here July 1st. So I'm excited to be with CPS. But my experience has a lot of IB, International Baccalaureate, in it. I began my journey with International Baccalaureate in about 2008 when my school district was looking to implement the continuum, the primary years program, the middle years program, and the diploma program at 3 Title I schools. So I was tasked with being a part of that project. Since then, I've worked as an IB coordinator at 2 schools. I've worked at our State Department of Education working with IB. I've worked as a district coordinator who oversaw IB. And I have worked as an assistant principal of curriculum working with IB. And so I've seen IB through a lot of lenses. I also currently still am a reader and a grader for International Baccalaureate, and I have been a site team evaluator. So I've seen it from a lot of lenses, and I think the thing about IB is that it changes lives, and it changed me as an educator fundamentally. The mission statement of IB is what first convinced me. I was told we were going to do IB, right? I didn't pick it. So when I started researching it and I read the mission statement, I fell in love because the end of the mission statement says, other people with their differences can also be right. And there are a lot of mission statements, and most of them say the same thing about scholars. But I've never read one that says other people with their differences can also be right. And when I read that, I thought, wow, I wish our politicians knew it. I wish our leaders knew it. But we're going to teach kids to know it, and we're going to change the world. And I think that's what IB does. When I think about the PYP program, the elementary school program, I always have 2 words that come to mind. The first one is beautiful, and the second one is equity. PYP is a beautiful, life-changing experience for all students in a school. PYP is transdisciplinary, it is collaborative, it is inquiry-based. It raises achievement by creating thinkers. And in our mission in this school district in CPS, we talk about achievement a lot. And the number one way to do that is to create kids who are interested in learning and who make connections and think. The equity piece comes to mind when I think about my education versus the education of a PYP student. PYP, I'm so sorry. PYP stands for Primary Years Program. So it is the program for our elementary schools. At the end of the program, all students who've been taught to make connections, to question, to have ownership for 6 years of education, all students take part in a big collaborative project. And it's an exhibition. And in that project, they take a real-world problem and they question it, and they find sources, and they dig into it, and they look at it transdisciplinary, and they work with the group, and they present. And this is where equity comes in for me. The first time I saw this done, I was blown away. To me, it looked like what I had done as a young child in gifted education. There were only like 20 of us doing it, right? But I saw 150 fifth graders doing this work. Our students who were struggling students were standing side by side with their peers, and they were questioning knowledge, they were finding valuable sources, and they were thinking about their actions on a local and global connection. They were achieving in a way I don't think many of us envision those types of learners achieving. And it absolutely changed my mind about education, changed where I thought we should begin. IB will make the claim a lot that we ask students to have a local and a global connection. And we have to define that for our scholars. We tell them that local is their family, local is their classroom, local is their school, local is their town, local is their state. What is the local connection? And how is that important for you as a learner in everything that you do? And I think that's something we forget in this world to teach kids. How are my actions important for my community, for my local community, and for the global world? So when we start our learners at 5 years old, at 6 years old, in the PYP program, and we teach them that they have to have agency, and at the same time, they have to have a real consciousness about their community, we make them into better citizens. And we make them into thinkers, and we make them into what we all got into education to be, which is lifelong learners. And I think that IB is really special in the way that it does that. The IB program continues to middle and high school as well if districts choose to go in that direction. But I love the fact that CPS wants to start the journey in the elementary school, because creating those lifelong learners out of our scholars is going to make them achieve in third grade testing and sixth grade testing and ninth grade testing and EOC testing and all the way up, because we make them interested in school. We make them come to school. We increase our achievement in that area. We make them do better in school. We increase our achievement in that area. And we master all of our goals by creating students who are interested in learning and who can make connections to the world around them. They know that the world is more than just about them. And then they always go back to the mission statement in their mind that others with their differences can also be right. So that's my feeling. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Virginia. So IB is obviously the one that we don't know enough about. I don't know enough about. I know Dr. Yearwood has been talking to me about that and educating me, and I'm also taking on my own education in relation to IB. So we just wanted Virginia to kind of make a testimony about International Baccalaureate so that we had kind of a broader view of what it is. So as I was saying before, we're enhancing our branding of the schools that we already have. We're adding some more. But we need to do a better job of creating excitement. We have wonderful schools here. We have wonderful schools with themes already. And so we really need to look critically at what are we doing to build excitement for teachers and scholars and families and guardians and community members regarding those. I just wanted to review some shared understandings of key terms. So many times these things kind of get bantered around as the same thing. So I'm not going to read all of this, but I wanted us to have kind of a touchstone, a glossary, if you will, about what each of these things mean. A lot of times PBL and PBE get confused. I think I have also said problem-based learning instead of project-based learning. So I'm correcting myself and educating myself on project-based learning. I just attended a 3-day institute online from the Buck Institute on project-based learning that was eye-opening. We also have Project Lead the Way. You see there the definition of theme schools. What does that actually mean? It's about innovation, it's about choice, and it's about attracting students beyond traditional boundaries. STEAM and STEM, we have AVID. We talk about AVID a lot, but if you're new to Columbia, you may not know the true purpose of AVID. And then, of course, as Virginia mentioned, International Baccalaureate. So what does all this mean for our scholars? Well, it creates unique opportunities for them, for our community, for guardians. It attracts students through specialized emphasis. It develops specific talents and interests, why they come to school, and it engages deeply with the subjects while meeting our rigorous curriculum requirements. We'll talk a little bit later about how we're not changing curriculum. We're changing focus, we're changing the lens, but our curriculum remains the same and it remains intact in theme schools. And innovation. Our scholars have enhanced opportunities through these schools. We have increased motivation during the day and after school. We've talked about an increase in attendance, increase in academics, and a decrease in discipline through that engagement. And also aligning our themes with current trends, keeping our education relevant, exciting, and also making sure that all 4 cores are taught, that we have a focus on our very important electives, and that we engage deeply with school. So through this journey I've taken, I've done a lot of research. I have more to do, but I just want to share with you some things that have popped up in relation to my research. Theme school principals say that a primary benefit of launching a theme concept is it motivates staff members to implement innovative strategies in the classroom. I mentioned to Leadership Council a few weeks ago that Carrie Graham, who's principal at Russell, did her dissertation on Jefferson becoming a STEAM school, and it's enlightening because it takes this research and it focuses it on Columbia. And so I'd be happy to talk to you about her research. She'd be happy to talk to you about her research, but one of the things she mentions in her dissertation is that theme schools really bring out that innovation. We have wonderful teachers. They're innovative already, but it creates a little spark in them as well to continue that innovation. So some challenges and the values of those. You just heard from Heather about our tax rates. We have funding issues all over the United States in various different ways, but this is a way to kind of translate that and overcome it with our demand issues in certain schools. And the value is offering diverse, engaging, high-quality educational options, which we already do. It's just enhancing them. Parent and community involvement with guardians and our local community is crucial for success and support of our theme schools. We need to be mindful about reflecting community needs and maintaining our high standards for education. And theme schools have shown improved parent-guardian involvement because of opportunities in special themed activities. So additional choices, scholars can choose what they want to do. And so when we think about fine arts, for example, we're thinking about offering gymnastics or ballet or theater. And so if you have a specific love of one of those types of fine arts, then we want to give scholars that choice. We also want to make sure that we're tying this to the curriculum audit. And we've done a lot of connections with our curriculum audit for the past year or so. And so I read through it again, and I kind of settled on finding 3.2, excuse me. So 3.2 finding from our audit focuses on student engagement within the classroom, strategies for teachers, use of technology, differentiation, and these are all things that are taken into account when we talk about theme schools. So sharing lessons that are engaging because of their content and increasing that authentic engagement. You also heard our curriculum coordinators and our exec directors talk about kick-ups and our principals during their PLDDs and how authentic engagement is so important in the classroom. And so we're promoting skills perhaps that aren't necessarily regularly addressed in the school day as well, with supplemental enrichment during school and after school. The third recommendation from the curriculum audit is continue to work to ensure equitable and equal access to rigorous curriculum and increase student engagement. I've been kind of focusing a lot on theme schools in relation to differentiation. So how can all of our scholars access themes? How can all of our scholars access enrichment opportunities? You heard Virginia mention that she just thought it was her gifted class that did this presentation. We want all of our scholars to have that opportunity to share their knowledge in a variety of ways. And this also goes back to our desire to increase academic performance and attendance. One thing is to have an idea, and another is to operationalize it. So this is the operationalized version of our CSIP goals. So what does the research say about the need for theme schools? So this is not a definitive research. I've just started this, but again, these kind of leapt out at me. An integrated curriculum could engage non-traditional, hard-to-reach students. Students and parents have opportunities to be creative, and they have choice. A theme is a signal to families and educators that you're trying to make school relevant and engaging. It becomes kind of our identity. If you go to a theme school, I'm special because I go to this theme school. This is important to me. I've ingrained this. We're talking with current theme schools about rebranding. How do we really celebrate and advertise the wonderful things that we're doing? Themes can lend cohesion at the curriculum and facilitate collaboration across disciplines. So an example from PBL is perhaps in math, looking at a systematic way of solving a problem. In science, you could also think about systems in relation to different scientific methods that you're discussing. In ELA, you might talk about nonfiction text that deals with systems. Our government-assisted system, you could talk about in social studies. So all core teachers teach our content, but they emphasize how there's a common theme, and that's something I learned from my PBL class that I went to. So when students feel they're part of school, our absenteeism decreases. When scholars identify with a school, they tend to be less absent. They have strong interest in school. Much like our studies that we do with athletics and activities, how do we engage students in school so that they'll come and that they'll stay? When we think about our scope and sequence, there's no change to our curriculum. This is an enrichment. This is a lens. This is an opportunity to be innovative. It's supplemental. It's through the lens of the theme. So we're not creating a brand new curriculum. We're not writing new curriculum for courses. All teachers can do this, that we have access to for all teachers and all scholars. We might have some opportunities to partner with different entities in the Columbia community. So For example, if we talk about fine arts, we could collaborate with Jabberwocky Studios, perhaps a gymnasium, a ballet teacher, a music teacher, a violin, strings teacher. And so we'll ask partners to provide pacing guides for us that we can make sure that we're on the right track. And we'll, of course, write MOUs with partners to include an expectation of guides and a sequence of activities that they'll perform for us. Now for the all-important budget. I took the attendance numbers, enrollment numbers from the schools listed, and this, in addition with Jefferson and Ridgeway, we're talking about 3,700 students that this would affect thus far. So I know that's important to think about how many scholars we're actually kind of touching with this. So this year, funding is coming from within our existing budgets for the current year. In the future, we'll build costs in as a recurring budget addition, but within the zero budget parameters, that process. I see Heather smiling over there since I said it right. And these are just preliminary projected budgets. These are ask for the moon kind of budgets. So you see there, fine arts on the left, 2025-26, project-based, place-based, STEAM, AVID, IB. And so these are, a lot of these costs we're already paying, especially for AVID, obviously, but this is an increase of getting our teachers to conferences, of implementing International Baccalaureate next year, and then also kind of rebranding and supporting schools with that kind of media or PR marketing system. You can see on the right, it's much the same. IB goes up because we would be adding 2 schools in New Southwest. And again, this is a preliminary budget. This is ask for the moon, and this again would impact about 3,700 scholars. So going back to our CSIP goals, there's a lot of work to be done. I hope to come back to you with more research and more information for you in December or January. I obviously have a lot of learning to do. I'll be learning from Virginia Tate since she's such an expert on IB. But we want to launch with fidelity. We want staff to have buy-in. We had a Zoom with all of our principals in relation to theme schools. We asked them to go back to their communities and their schools to see if they would take this journey with us. And so it's nothing that we're kind of throwing at them. We want staff buy-in. We know how important that is. And so we want to launch this with fidelity. We want to do it right. We want to go through the initiative process and make sure that it is the best thing for scholars and teachers in our community.
Thank you, Dr. Porter.
You're welcome.
Does anyone have any questions? Ms. Brown?
I don't think my microphone's working, but, so I'm gonna work my way backwards. On the slide on the budget, I know Ridgeway doesn't really fit in there anywhere, and so I didn't know if it was reflected in a number here, or maybe because it's a small autonomous school, it didn't really apply.
So I did put it in the total. Ridgeway last year enrollment was 231.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I didn't know if it was reflected in these numbers.
It's not reflected in the budget. It is reflected in the total numbers of scholars. Correct.
And then my other question, we've got a lot going on currently at different schools. Can you, I heard we're starting, or the proposal is looking at something at Blue Ridge, looking at something at the New Southwest, and starting something at Derby. Were there any other, I wasn't sure from that list
Sure.
if they were in existence or it was something we were looking at that's brand new for one of the particular schools.
Well, it'd be brand new for New Southwest.
Right.
And then obviously for Blue Ridge.
Right.
And then fine arts at Derby.
Right.
And then I'm really looking for another STEAM STEM school and another elementary AVID school.
Okay. All right. But right now, this list, there's just 3 that are brand new on this. Okay. All right. That's what I wondered.
Thank you. Thanks.
Ms. Snodgrass?
My microphone is super loud, especially compared to some of the others.
It's in all of our power.
Very softly. I just wanted to really recognize the really thoughtful way that you've gone about approaching all of this. I think that we hear a lot sometimes about, you know, maybe not everything was thought through for implementation. And as you said, like, it's a great idea, and then the implementation has to be really intentional to make sure that it works. And so your research, everything you've done, the way you're really thoughtfully looking at all of it so that you can take this project that was presented and given and really make it into something great for our district. So I just want to commend you, and also the rest of the cabinet who I know you'll be working with, because and all the coordinators and everyone else. I know none of it happens in a vacuum. The one thing that I'm curious about, and this isn't something for an answer right now, but I know, you know, we just went through a very long process to redo boundaries for our elementary schools. And now we're talking, and our middle schools, and now talking about, like, one of the goals of this is potentially, right, so that different schools might attract different people. And so just looking forward to, in the future, hearing really thoughtfully about how we're thinking through what that does to attendance at the different schools, how we go about ensuring that any process for people requesting to move, things like that, is also going to be integrated smoothly. And I know that that will entail a lot of work, probably with other cabinet members, with Lizelle, with others. So just looking forward to that as we get further down the road and start thinking about it for stuff. But thank you very much. And thank you,
Ms.
Dr. Yearwood, for bringing that all to us.
Dr. Porter, I was gonna say Helena, and I was like trying
Oh, you
not
can
to.
tell me now. I'm gonna call first.
I appreciate where you have, like, in the prelim, like, potential, like, pie in the sky kind of budget stuff there. And I know you're sharing that potentially you might be presenting again in December, January. But potentially, I would appreciate if maybe at a finance committee or something like that, as we get closer to the end of this calendar year of 24, maybe just seeing where you're still thinking on that and stuff. And whether that's coming from you or something that you give to Heather, kind of share with the committee, I think would be good. So I would appreciate that.
Great idea, thank you.
I have a couple of questions. Kind of along with the budget, I'm thinking about the timeline of rollout, and as we have to think about the budget in December, and then kindergarten enrollment starts shortly after, like by April. What is your sense of the timeline of rollout for these different programs? I would assume some of them are easier to implement than others, and so do you have kind of a broad sense of like an implementation schedule?
Sure. I think you're right. So the theme schools that we already have, we want to rebrand, supplement, really engage and enrich, you know, kind of the vibrancy of what they are. IB does not allow you to engage until you have a established school for a year. And so that's why that's kind of all kind of pushed down. I'm going to have to continue communication with them to talk about specific timelines in relation, but IB that's why it's next year or the year after. We are working currently with Derby Ridge. We have the high steppers going into Derby Ridge twice a week, hopefully this semester, to start that enrichment. And so I want to say it's easier with fine arts, but there's kind of more opportunity to kind of plug things in there. Avid at Alpha continues to grow. I believe all of you are invited to celebrate Avid at Alpha. But when I look through our elementary schools and try to partner with one of them for an additional Avid school, that will take more time. So it's kind of, I think about it like a staircase, but it's not linear. Some stairs are shorter than others. So STEM and STEAM and PBL, PBE, they're already going. And so to support those schools, to get them really kind of over the ledge of their first or second year, I think it's going to be important. So everyone's timeline is going to be different. I'd be happy to put together a timeline for each individual school, though, if that would be helpful, for you all to share, maybe in a Friday report.
Sure, and I think maybe also as you talk about rebranding, it makes sense to include like the communications department, and if this is something that we're using to showcase our differentiation throughout the community.
Correct.
Just having that like pushed out and be like, oh, I didn't know that this school did this, you know, I hear that sometimes. And then my other question was, what was the feedback received when you shared with principals and they were asked to go to their staffs? Were there any concerns about additional expectations or
Sure,
what kind of training they would need? Like what did you hear?
Yeah, so we did it in the spring, which I think was helpful, because they kind of got to think about it and sit on it for a little bit. I just asked these principals to take the journey with me, right? So be open to the possibilities, and really, especially with IB, we've heard that it's a great program, but we don't know enough about it. And so for a principal to be like, I'm all in, let's go, I wanna be respectful of their commitment to their staff and their scholars, while also supporting them and saying, you can do this is gonna be wonderful. So I think there was some, maybe unsure, but they were willing to take the plunge. And so I think it would be disingenuous if we said, oh yeah, we're ready to go, 100%. We want them to be reflective and to think about feedback that they can give us, and how we can be supportive to them in relation to maybe enhancing a theme, as you said.
So this would not necessarily entail a lot of professional development in the existing programs?
Well, I think we have professional, like I mentioned, TSS at Russell, and so we have that professional development. But how many of us knew, unless you read the contract, that Russell was on the second year of TSS? So we need to celebrate that. They're working really hard already on that professional development, right? And so we need to acknowledge that and celebrate that and support them in that. I think there will be more professional development. That's some of the cost in there is there's a fine arts integration specialist conference next summer that Locust really wants to go to, and they don't have the opportunity to go because of funds. Well, let's support them with that and take more people than perhaps they thought they could.
Mr. Willoughby?
It's the orange one, not the green one this time. And when you say additional professional development, and you can correct, I want you to correct me if I'm wrong. I am filtering it as meaning that it might mean that the principal directed professional development at that time are these additional support areas that we're having compared to maybe something else that had been happening in the past.
Correct. We need to be careful though about what the district expects for professional development and what's going on the building level and make sure they're congruent. And make sure they're connected. We're not gonna say to, Locust, well, you don't have to do any professional development on reading or math we're not gonna say that. That would not go well. So we've gotta it's kind of a balance, right? We've gotta make sure that we're supporting them in this lens of fine arts. And if you teach at Locust, you're already on board with that. But also, these are the expectations for our core areas. Didn't answer your question, but sort of.
Yes. And if I may, to add on to the question, when we met with the principals, we made sure we let them know this is a choice. This is not something that is being mandated. And we shared sort of the initial thoughts, and I think we waited about 2-3 weeks.
2 weeks.
And we asked them to come back with their thoughts and so on. Some of them came back in and, yeah, let's go. Some came back and says, pause, and we respected that. So it wasn't any school that we go, you have to, no, nothing like that. We were very respectful of their input and their choice. And like I said, there's some that says, not now, and we respected that. And we said, that's perfectly fine.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Porter.
Thank you for your
We'll hear from
time.
you again. All right, next on our agenda is a brief discussion about a matter about Battle High School. Dr. Holtz wants to just make us aware of something, and then we can discuss it briefly if we need to.
Okay, this is the mic that's working?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so the administration is presenting an update to the Board of Education regarding a proposed amendment to a full-time equivalent position at Battle High School. This FTE will help to support the needs of the students and staff at Murrell Battle High School. The administration at Battle has determined that the current staffing for social studies is sufficient, and the previously allocated FTE for a social studies teacher is no longer needed. The school is requesting to reallocate this FTE to hire an additional dean of students. This adjustment is driven by the following factors. So the first is to increase support needs. So an additional district special education classroom has been added to the building this year, which is increasing the need for administrative support. The second is staffing gaps. Many of the special education and math positions are currently staffed by permanent substitutes or those teachers on TACs, which is temporary certifications, necessitating stronger administrative oversight. Third is there's growing 504 caseloads. There's been a significant rise in the number of students with 504 plans, reflecting a district-wide trend. The fourth is instructional focus. The addition of a dean of students would allow assistant principals to concentrate more on instructional support rather than responsive services. And then finally, attendance improvements. The school experienced a 10% decline in attendance last year, so the proposed change would enable a more focused approach to achieving attendance goals. So the financial impact is both of these positions, the social studies position and the dean of students, are both following the teacher salary schedule, but the dean of students role does receive a $3,000 stipend and 10 extra work days paid at $300 per day. So there would be a slight financial impact change.
So this is not something we need to vote on. We don't vote on allocation of FTE. This was just something that Dr. Holtz wanted input from the board on. I think one of the only questions that came up when Mr. Lyman and I were asked about it was what happens to the social studies position next year? Like if Battle needs that social studies position next year, what happens? Could you address that briefly?
Yeah, so when we spoke about this, one of the thoughts was that this position would be an interim, so it would just be for the year, and if the need arose for next year, that we would reconsider it during the budget process. So that if next year, if the need for social studies, there was a need for the social studies, they would get that FTE back for the social studies, but not necessarily also for the dean, so then they don't get the two, right, the 2 for 1. And I also wanted to share there is a process for principals to request additional FTE or to swap out. In this case, they have to go through Talent Ed records, put in their request, and it goes through a workflow. Dr. Klein is on that workflow, Ms. MacArthur's on that workflow, myself, and so there's various steps. And so we just wanted to make sure that you were all aware of this change.
Does anyone have any questions? All right. Thank you, Dr. Holtz.
Thank you.
All right, we've come to our consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Do we move to approve it before we remove something?
Do you want to remove something?
I have a couple questions about no vote, because I didn't get it asked.
Okay, so is there a motion to approve the consent agenda only for the Pear Deck Tutor Services Agreement?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, so now we'll consider the Novo Staffing Master Services Agreement. Is there a motion to approve that? And then we'll have discussion if there's a motion.
So moved.
Second. Okay, what's your question?
Yeah, so we got an email late last night with some answers to some questions. And so I just wanted to confirm, so I know we had to send it back to Novo. Did our attorneys reread the additions to 7B? And did they have any concerns with having to potentially, if anything were to happen, which I don't expect, to have to litigate this in Florida?
So there's an option of that litigation part that's federal court. And so federal would be comprehensive of all, so it wouldn't be official, like a state-specific thing. And so that is within that section 13. And with the other one, 7B, they did implement our change that we requested, so they had the agency and the customer, so it would be reciprocal, and the non-compete clause, and so they made that change when we requested it from their legal team.
And then the only other question I had, and I don't know if this is a question that is for you, but this is of course to be used on an as-needed basis. Where we stand today, I know, I think we have all of our teaching spots filled, at least as of yesterday. How many, if we had to call this company today, how many people do we need to call and tell them to come send? Do we know?
No, we do not,
Okay.
we don't have an exact number.
I mean, I don't think we need anything immediately, it's just as needed. I mean, Dr.
Oh.
Klein, I think, did you have that information? I think right now, we are understanding that we don't need anything
At the moment.
immediately. And so as we would go and we would need this, then we would be able to review and evaluate, this is what we need, this
Right.
is how much it's gonna cost, and we'll be able to approve each one of those on a case-by-case
Right.
specific basis.
Thank you.
Ms. Snodgrass.
I just wanted to make sure, I know you mentioned like some of the things that were adjusted and can see right in the no temporary hire with the attachment, right, agency and customer agreed, and some of those things, and I just wanted to double check, that there weren't any of the additional concerns that I know were broached that we need to address, in terms of like fee schedules or various things, like, has all of that then been amended and figured out?
So the fee schedule, there was not a fee schedule incorporated with it, there is a range, and so each one of them, again, is on a case-by-case specific basis. They would be able to offer, this is based on this individual person's qualifications and tenure and all that stuff, and then they would be able to offer, this is the person that we have available, we have to review that, determine what the cost, is this what we want, is this the person we select, and then we will, and then once we use them, then we'll be able to review how much they're charging us and make sure all of that is right. But again, there's no one that's right now needed, and so anything that's gonna come to us is gonna be able to be reviewed prior to on a case-by-case basis. So there's not something like that was existing, that was part of this contract that got missed. It's not something that that exists currently. And what was the other part of that question?
Some of the other concerns, so the one other one, and I wanted to, I guess maybe this is more for Dr. Holtz, wanted to make sure that she felt, that you feel, sorry, as I'm looking at you, don't need to talk about it, feel comfortable with what the responsibilities are for our HR department compared to what we are expecting from an outside contractor in terms of verifying certifications and things like that, because it feels like if we say you need to be providing us with someone with certain certifications, that typically like that contractor would be required to make sure they're fulfilling that need, and I just wanna make sure that our HR department is doing a lot, that it's not gonna become, in the case that we need to hire someone in that way, a burden on HR, so I just wanted to check
I'll
in.
let Michelle answer as well, but also just to reiterate, like we do background checks for all of our contracts, even our construction contracts. So like doing background checks and that piece of it on contractors is not something that we don't already do for lots and lots of contracted situations. And if we were to use this, and Michelle, I guess, can piggyback on this as well, this is in lieu of an employee, so we would already be if there was an employee in this position, we would already be having to check their certifications. So if there's a one-off here, there's, a handful of employees, I don't know that it would be an additional burden for them to have to double check certifications.
Yeah, I would say not. We already have a process for when we partner with outside organizations, just as with IAG, our international partnership, where they send us information. We would just use our same process. We would review resumes, make sure that the proper certification, we would do all of our checks, and so I don't think that there be any additional burden or anything.
Mr. Lemon.
It certainly makes sense to make sure that anybody that's in or around our buildings, we're checking to make sure that it's cool that they're there, they're qualified to do what they're doing. I just wanna make sure, real quick, I understand. We've got a position that's open, we're obviously trying to fill it with a full-time person, we're reaching out to a couple folks. We reach out to this company, we say, hey, we need somebody that can do X, Y, or Z. They say, well, we do, and they want $25,000, whatever, to come in and do it for 3 months or whatever. We have the ability to say, we're not going that high. And then there's a little bit of back and forth, and then they go, okay, they'll come in and do it for 18 or whatever the number is. I'm just making numbers up. But that's why there's no set fee thing. It's we have a need. They say we have somebody that will fill the need. There's some negotiation on the salary and the whatnot, or what the pay is going to be in the time range, the expectations. Everybody's amenable to it.
Correct.
Okay, cool.
All right, Seeing no other questions, we will do a show of hands vote. Any, we have a motion and a second to approve the Novo Staffing Master Services Agreement. All in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the motion passes. Next, we have the consideration of the recommendation for the Coordinator of Compliance and Investigation. Is there a motion to approve that updated job description?
So moved.
Second?
Dr. Holtz, if you want to say anything about that, you are welcome to.
Yeah, just from the last time that we met, the only change at this point is the title, Coordinator of Compliance and Investigation, so it does align with the requirements for DESE to require an administrative cert. And then in the job description, the second sentence was added, and we replaced the evaluation component because there was concern about that and some conflict of interest. So the new sentence says, in collaboration with the school improvement department, the compliance investigator will collaborate and assist with the implementation of district curriculum and compliance assurances across the buildings and district. So that was the added job responsibility there. And then the salary range was amended a bit from $60,000 to $95,000.
Right. Any questions? Thank you, Dr. Holtz. There's a motion and a second. This will be a roll call vote.
Ms. Snodgrass,
Abstain.
Ms. Burrell,
Yes.
Mr. Willoughby,
Yes.
Mr. Cobbins,
Yes.
Mr. Lyman,
Yes.
Ms. Waters.
Yes. All right, the new job description has been approved. Next, we will have a first, we're having a first read and discussion for the compensation and classification consulting services. So I assume there's gonna be a little bit of presentation about that, and then if there are questions about that, we'll send them to Dr. Yearwood, and we will approve, this will be considered for a second read and final approval at the September 9th meeting.
Okay.
Go ahead, Dr. Holtz.
So it is a recommendation of the interview team and administration that the Board of Education approve the bid award and agreement with Gallagher Benefit Services to provide compensation and classification consulting services for the district with a project timeline of September 2024 to January 2025. An interview team consisted of 6 members. The district issued a request for proposal for compensation and classification consulting services on July 1st. 7 firms responded to the RFP, and their RFPs were reviewed by the interview team. 5 finalists were selected for interviews. Interviews were conducted on August 1st, and after the interviews, the interview team found Gallagher Benefit Services to be the best provider for the requested services, and is recommending this vendor to be selected. Ms. Snodgrass was part of the interview team, and we thank her for her time. I wasn't sure if you wanted to share your thoughts and some additional information.
Sure. I was just going to say, and I don't know exactly, I guess that it's not a presentation so much as the information, but the firm that was selected, I think there was a lot of, one, that all the firms had really great things to offer. We had a lot of really good sort of competitive RFPs, I guess, in that sense. There was a range in terms of cost, but there was also a range in terms of the specific offerings in terms of things that the firms were able to provide, both in terms and also the amount of workload that was going to be, for example, on our HR department compared to the things that those firms were going to do. And so when we think about like that range, I think that's important. There was pretty unanimous consensus that everyone really liked Gallagher because, sorry, it's early and I need to get my coffee, needs to like get through. In part because of these same things, the sort of the balance in terms of what they were charging compared with the amount of work that they were actually going to take on and the actual really clear deliverables that they were able to present. They also were one of the few that was really clear about how they were going to hold data securely, which was really important to us. They also have a lot of knowledge of the local Columbia economy because they've done work with some local firms and also had some really clear deliverables in terms of what they were going to do to help us after they collected all the data and analyzed it in terms of implementation and options for implementation and the ways they could work with HR and the ways they sort of took on a lot of the workload to be able to pull everything together. Whereas, like we had one firm that did something similar but was going to ask HR to enter all the information into a spreadsheet as opposed to just sending all the job descriptions. And we did not want our poor HR team to be stuck with that. So it was, anyway, so I'll just say, and I won't speak for the rest of the team, but I think they agree. Everyone was I was really impressed with the presentation, what they offered, and sort of the clear deliverables that they were able to show, and feel really confident about what Gallagher is going to be able to offer.
Another point to add was they didn't have any hidden fees where other companies said that, and this, since this is a new process, we don't know what we don't know until we're in it, and then that might cause more, more cost. Right, so that, so.
And remind me of the timeline, they're gonna have it finished in September, October?
I thought it was like a 6 month, right?
Yeah, starting in the September and we'll go through January, so then in time when we start budget season, we'll have those recommendations to be able to implement and give these different scenarios. Like depending on cost of how much, or like we might have to have a multi-year implementation depending on what we have to do with salaries and those type things. But then we'll be able to take those considerations and bring you guys options during the whole budget process in the spring.
Perfect. Ms. Brown?
I'm still working my way through all the documents, but one of the things that I noticed the other night, and so I was just a question for either you or Jean. Under the scope of work, it talks about market comparisons should include public school districts, charter management organizations, intermediary units, and private independent schools located in Missouri. My question is, we have some positions that are, of course, applicable to many industries, like HR or finance. Are they looking at any of those types of things, or is this specific only to educational type institutes that they're comparing?
My understanding, and this was some of the questions that were asked when we asked about each of the companies about sort of what they were able to bring in terms of their unique knowledge of like the Columbia economy, is that they are also looking at places where the jobs are applicable to Columbia, so like a comparison both to the Columbia economy and available jobs here, and also to educational institutions, which tend to be outside of Columbia just because we are a single school district here. And so like I know they've worked with the university, they've worked with transportation companies here in Columbia, so they have some experience working with different segments of the economy and different industries locally and throughout the state.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I was just curious that obviously a lot of our positions are specific to education, but we also have a handful that, we don't want Michelle or Heather to go anywhere. But if they wanted to go be CFO or Chief Human Resource Officers at Shelter or State Farm, they're qualified to do that. They don't have to limit that to education. So I just wanted to check on that. So that's great.
All right, if anyone comes up with further questions, send them to Dr. Yearwood, copy board leadership, and then we'll get the answers. Thank you, Dr. Holtz. All right, that's it. We will go ahead. Is there a motion to adjourn to closed session?
So move, we need that thing, don't we?
Yeah, in accordance with section 610.021.1313 RSMO, I move that the Columbia Board of Education meet an executive session immediately following adjournment of this meeting at the Administration Building, 1818 West Worley Street, Columbia, Missouri, for the purpose of considering personnel recommendations, personnel issues, and confidential or privileged communications between the district and its attorneys.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, this roll call vote.
Mr. Willoughby?
Yes.
Ms. Snodgrass?
Yes.
Ms. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Cobbins?
Yes.
Mr. Lyman?
Yep.
Ms. Waters?
Yes. All right, thank you.
Yes.
And the closed session will be on the other side of the divider.